Yo guys, so we have a new character Beebo and we have some Brawl changes, but what does it actually do to the meta for the game? So in this, I'm going to run through and talk about characters objectively, analyze their strengths and just how good I think they are in that sort of fashion. But then I'm also going to go ahead and give you guys my actual placement based on how good I think the character really is for the average player. So basically for you watching the video here. All right, so jumping right into it, we're going to talk about Brall. So Brall is basically just the demon spawn of all time, right? This character has the ability to do just a ridiculous amount of things, and even people at the highest level haven't gotten anywhere near unlocking proper application for all this character can do. So in terms of raw objective power, with just like I said, all the movement, all the knockback, all the stuns, all the healing, all the insta eliminating of wisps, just all the stuff that the character can do, in terms of objective raw power, this would pop him like straight up into S tier, right? But in terms of how the average player is going to go ahead and get this, and maybe, you know, better for you watching the video, if you don't have a lot of time in the character and you aren't towards the upper regions of the game already, it's going to be a little bit difficult for you to access the power of Brawl. Especially after some of the nerfs where they reduced his ability to empower himself easily and then just objectively reduce some of his damage by 10%. They did give him back the knockback on his primary, so if he's on top of someone just slapping them, it's going to be a lot harder for them to hit him, just because they're always going to be like getting jostled, right? But he's still a little bit difficult for the average player to get a good hold on. However, the character is still ridiculously broken, so instead of him being like S++, like going off my screen tier, he's more like A tier for the average player, I would say. All right, so Bishop. Bishop has a lot of objective strength too. The character has a lot of mobility, solid damage output. The ranged knockback grenade is something that's been a underutilized and underviewed portion of her kit, but that's very powerful in how it can just displace people and just like knock them back and push them like 2 or 3 seconds out of the fight while you're busy dealing with the rest of their team, right? And then she has all this power to punch people, insta knock wisps, punch them into each other, bully teams, and just be really good at rezzing, but also like really good at kiting people permanently. So in terms of her like raw strength, I think I'd also put her like pretty high up, like A minimum. But her damage is solid, but it's not super reliable, and it can be difficult to position yourself well and take advantage of that value. So she's getting a little bit more towards C tier. You know, not the absolute most broken, not something I would tell people not to try. And you know, if you get a little bit of time of her, maybe you're not like crazy at her, but you get pretty solid at her, she can definitely bump up. So don't let this stop you from playing her. All right, now to something we've been wondering about, Beebo. So Beebo is a weird little thing. He has very poor utility, or very poor movement outside of his ultimate, and then he has these weird sorts of damage, right? So his R&B, the slingshot, is just shooting out these 4 different types of zeeps, they call them, and so that can be something that's pretty difficult to manage, about actually taking advantage of the healing, the anti-heal fire, AoE, the slowing ice, and then the bungee-esque one that can pull you or pull enemies towards you. And so, you know, you have that, but then you have this really powerful grenade or bomb that you can launch at people, and then a very powerful slap from the baseball bat if you can charge it up fully. And so what does all this put Beebo at? The real part of Beebo is just that mobility really is king in this game. And so if you're just trying to play the game and trying to just, you know, climb the ladder and just enjoy yourself, you'll struggle with this character. He doesn't have, you know, just to compare him to something like Bishop that I even put in here at C tier, Bishop's damage is similarly reliable to Beebo with the regular primary fire, but even easier to hit really with Bishop, because she has infinite rockets. They're always consistent and the same. They don't require mana, whereas he has to use his slingshot. And then you have a nade that you can punch at people, and you have just such a dramatically higher amount of movement. The ultimate's worse. These characters are very similar, but you know, Beebo's ultimate's really strong. It can grab people and throw them out into the storm, or you know, pull them with a bomb to hit them into a wall and explode them. But outside of that, the characters kind of suffer. right? And it requires a lot of good, like high tier, excellent gameplay to get solid value out of it. So, you know, even at like max tiers of gameplay, I really wouldn't be putting him high at all. Maybe he could bridge up into a C, but I think realistically we're looking at a D. If you play with like an organized stack and you compensate by finding movement powers like a, hover wings or grappling hook, that can get you a lot of extra value on Beebo. Charge up your bat, grappling hook, swing in, boom. I believe it works like that. It really should. But, that's stuff you can look to do. Otherwise, though, Beebo's a little bit of a struggle, to be honest. So, moving on to Celeste. Celeste is a character that is currently kind of been out-meted, I would say. There's other characters in the game that are just kind of better in what they want to do, right? She competes in the slot with Oath, right? She competes with Oath in terms of like space controlling, in terms of damage. She competes with characters like Myth and Ghost and Shrike and Jewel, Hudson even. And so since she requires a little bit more skill in terms of how you use her wall to manipulate people and getting good timings to zone people with her ultimate, or even be able to land her ultimate, which can be a struggle, she isn't really pulling herself up too far, to be completely honest. I think that potentially at really high tiers you could get, like, if you play around it, you could bump her up pretty high. I don't really think she's definitely not S tier, and I would say she's probably not even A tier really. So I'm putting her for the average player around D tier, to be honest. If you get some skill in the character, and you're playing pretty solidly, probably get her up into D tier. If you get a good hold on using the wall in the ultimate, it just takes a little bit of time, and it might not be as easy as other characters. All right, now on to Myth. So Myth is another character that I think is an absolute demon. This character has just like the best range in the game and the most consistent damage at that range. It has an obscene ultimate that just destroys Oath's shield and cleaves through enemies and just does like knockback and just dumb levels of damage. But on top of that, she has some of the best mobility in the game, the ability to dash through walls, portal teammates through also. She has, all this sort of utility, right? But what makes her, and her knockback arrow too. But what makes her the most like oppressive is her rain of arrows that has the anti-heal, right? Enemies are spread out like this. You just toss the anti-heal arc in between them like this, and then they just suffer, right? They can't go back, they can't go forward, and they're cut in half, and they just die. And it's like, you're getting damage while you're in it, you're getting anti-healed if you move through it. It's just miserable, right? And she does arguably require some skill to get a hold of, I think, but I think she's still really strong. And so, S tier at highest level for sure. But I even think for the average player, I think this character is more than worth investing into. I put her at S tier also. All right, so next on we have Jhin. Jhin is something of a character that I'd also like to see nerfed a lot, and I'm kind of surprised he didn't get any nerfs. The execution at 45% HP is kind of nutty. However, the biggest little discriminator I have here for my conversation on Jhin is that there are a couple of movement techs that it takes understanding and being solid at to get good value on him, and then having a good like understanding of the combo, right, or to how to use these things. He gets a lot of value from charging up his left click, dashing him on someone, hitting it, uppercutting, and then slamming, right? That should generally let him be able to finish off a target. But if you don't get it, you don't get that combo, you can struggle a little bit. I think the character's insane. The ultimate's insane too, being able to TP with it, but he can be a little bit difficult to access also. I don't think too difficult. I think he seems a lot more difficult to access than he really is. So, while I think he's like S tier for pub stomping, I think I'd put him down towards A tier, potentially lower A tier. But go watch one of the Jhin streamers. Go watch like Illusion or Paria or some of the other guys. I think Lemur plays a decent amount of Jhin sometimes. Check them out and get an idea for how to play the characters. Also watch my Jhin guide, and then you can pop off on the character. All right, moving on. So to Shiv. Shiv is a character that I think is overloaded hit-wise. I think she's really overloaded in terms of just like the crazy amount of damage that she can do and the healing that she has and the like crazy ridiculous OP ultimate. However, I do think that she doesn't get quite as much value objectively as like a Jhin and a Brall does. I think I put her at like A tier in like a pub stomping, or you know, like not pub stomping, but like just like not like super high organized play, right? Like just playing your pubs sort of general strategy. But because she's a little bit more difficult to access in terms of making sure you're hitting your resets on your cartwheel, making sure you have good ideas of how to flank and how to engage and timing wise, those sorts of things. It takes her away from an A and it puts her towards like a lower B, I would say. A little bit on the lower side of the B, but she's still very strong. And you want to have fun with a character that rewards your skill. This character is kind of it. The ultimate gives way too much free value, but yeah. Alright, Ghost. Ghost is a bit of a tricky one. Ghost, I think, is appallingly strong. I think the character has become the new Hudson, basically, in terms of how much just damage he just does. You know, he's just out here, he's just like laying down the damage. And the amount of damage he's doing with his regular primary fire is like as much as it used to be with the Dazed, like the old Dazed version. I might be exaggerating a little bit, but he does a bunch of damage. They gave him a 20% damage buff last patch. That's insane. Like you don't do that. Like in Overwatch, the amount of damage that they would adjust Soldier was taking his damage from like 19 to 20, 20 to 21, and back by like 1. So you're operating in like 5 to 4% damage ranges. And in this game, we throw a fat 20% on him. But, you know, I'm ranting. However, this character has amazing range damage, range pressure. The ultimate's potentially really strong. And the nades are just like huge in terms of their radius. And if you hit one on someone and you can damage them afterwards, they're like basically just dead. However, having said that, I think it's hard to get the ability to just like sit in his value zones in your typical matches and at your typical skill levels, because your teammates won't slow down a little bit and help you get time to spam, or they won't peel you off of characters like Jhin and Brall running you down. And these characters are very prevalent right now everywhere. So instead of him being like a high A tier, which I think is what he really is, I think I'm going to put him at like a very skill dependent low B or high C. So, yeah. All right. So, jumping on to Shrike. Shrike is a very bad character. He lacks the ability to provide anything to the team really, other than just damage output that's back-weighted. There's lots of ways to exploit it by just diving on top of her or using certain characters that can outrange her, even like, you know, Myth that can toss arrows behind her and then ult her and stuff like that even. However, the sort of knowledge of how to defeat her is not prevalent in the average player base at all. It's why Shrike players are so, like, why people hate Shrike so much and why people think she's so strong. Because she will 2-tap you. She's a stat check character. And the reality is, you know, for the average person, they don't know how to beat that stat check. So, you know, and especially if you start playing just a little bit better, you can get some pretty darn solid value out of Shrike. Just don't expect her to scale well. I think she is worse than... I think I would rather have her like a super high organized thing. I'd rather only have like maybe Beebo over Shrike, or other way around. I'd maybe only rather have Shrike over Beebo. Maybe, but I'd probably rather have Beebo. However, for the average person, the listener here at home, I think I'd slap Shrike up at A. She'll just click on you, you know, and she will do that. All right, Jewel. So Jewel is a character that's similar to Jhin and Brall. I think Jewel has a lot of power. I don't think she's as just dummy busted as Jhin and Brall are in terms of just raw output. Or Myth even. I think she's probably a high A tier character normally. But the ability to access her skill is something that, or her value is something that's a little bit skill dependent. And can be quite difficult against certain characters. If you're playing against a Myth, Shrike, even like a Bishop it can be a struggle to outrange them, and it can be another struggle to deal with characters like Oath when you don't have a team that's going to support you in defeating the enemy shield, right? For that Oath, or just helping you enable you defeat what you're trying to kill. And so it can be a little bit hard. And so while she is quite powerful in terms of just raw numbers and the ability to reset her dashes and deal huge damage and her ultimate to stack the whole enemy team, I think realistically she's like up and down in lower C, DVH, maybe higher C, somewhere around this range. Similar issues to Ghost, I'd say. All right, Void. Void is another character that I think has been buffed a lot and given, honestly, like a pretty darn overloaded kit in terms of raw numbers and just how they keep buffing him. But the reason they keep buffing him is because they operate off of win rates, and he doesn't have a very good win rate on average. That's because he doesn't have good movement. His movement's very bad, and that's really bad for ranked, and it's really bad for climbing in it and doing pubs, just because you need to be the one to run away and rescue your team and save them. Which is part of why Jhin and Brall are so broken, but side note. And so if you are the Void, you know, you're taking that away from yourself, and you're relying on hitting stuns, your teammates supporting you, hitting ultimates that your allies rely on. So it can be a little bit of a struggle in terms of getting the value that the character can, right? Or just having your team play around you, because you do require that a bit more. So having said that, he's dropping into D. I think in terms of a really high tier gameplay, or in terms of his like maximum value, I think he could be pushing up into A. I think the character can do some nasty things, especially with powers, like Invis cloaks, which are not nerfed at all for him because he can't dash, right? So it didn't affect that at all, because they made it so when you dash, you get taken out for a time, or you just get taken out of like delicate, or like the mana cloak, but then the delicate barrier or the delicate cloak, you're invis for like, you're visible for 4 seconds. All right, moving on anyway. On to Hudson. So the devs did this really cool thing of shadow buffing Hudson, which is horrifying, and we can stop doing that. Theorycraft, I think we actually should probably just leave this character in the trash can. Maybe go toss him in there and bury it, and yeah. Ugh. However, they made it so his barbed wires are able to be placed a long distance again. They're just breakable now. But the problem is, it takes a lot to break them. I know that me on Oath, like if I'm just sitting there like regular hammer swinging at it, it takes me like 2 or 3, I think it's like 3 full hammer swings to break it. And if you level it up, it gets an additional 100 HP, which would be an additional, or 1000 HP, which would be an additional 2 full hammer swings for me, right? So it has a lot of health. The character is still limited in its dashing because they didn't change that, but they also made it so his like rev up on his primary fire is faster, I believe. And so he's gotten some healthy, strong buffs for him, unhealthy for the game, but he's been given a huge power increase. And so Hudson is also very stat checky too, and having the ability to beat him is something that certain characters just don't really have a capability to do so. Like an Oathbreaker, an Oath will struggle to beat Hudson, like he just will. And certain characters just like lose, like Void can't do it. Like a Beebo'S gonna have a hard time also, probably. It's not a fun time for them. But he also just beats people who don't understand how to bypass his damage and dive onto him, or have a team that can help coordinate with that. So Hudson, while I would say he's probably now at like B tier in terms of like objective strength for the average set of players, I think we're putting him like pretty solidly into A. This is high A. This isn't like the bottom of A. Like this is pretty high into A. I'm a little bit scared, to be honest. We should not have done this. I don't know why we have an obsession with reverting changes that were good for the game, guys. Please, please, please. Okay. Felix. Felix is lower on the scale in terms of raw power. He does a lot of what something like Brall does, or Bishop does, in terms of providing an engage. And also similar to what Oath does in terms of offering an engage. But there's better ways to do basically everything that he wants to do. There's better ways to throw down like huge AoE zones of death that don't require physical body commitment. There's better ways to anti-heal people. His damage is pretty poor after you've actually like gone on top of people, and he gets knocked off easily and stat checked by a lot of characters. Because he's also a stat check character. He's just easier to pilot, so he's been nerfed down for the average player, right? He's not getting buffed up like Hudson is, or I mean, he's not getting like kept too good like Jhin and Brall are, right? But where does this actually leave him? Felix, because he's easier to pilot and he's not horrible, he's just not that great. I'm going to put him in B tier. I would normally put him in like D tier, but with this set of, you know, the way the meta is developing and the fact that he's pretty easier to play for the average player means you're gonna get a pretty good amount of value out of him. So D tier-ish. All right, Kingpin. Kingpin did get indirect nerfs this patch with the way that the stealth cloak was changed and the way that the delicate cloak was changed also. And so he no longer has the ability to exploit the invis by dashing under it. But the thing is that invis is just as strong as it used to be if you can not dash. Which the thing is, enemies can't tell where you are, so you can just walk up to them anyway and then dash them and they're not going to be able to react to it, right? Or hook them. And so it is harder to get certain invis items in the game. Kind of with the way that the global shop has changed. More or less the same as it used to be, actually. And so, yeah. Kingpin, though, besides the stealth cloak, lacks a lot of movement, and so that's a serious struggle in terms of saving yourself from your team, or you're saving yourself to res your team when they start losing. But he does have the ability to carry pre-fights, right? Mid-fights can be a struggle, but if you're just good at hooking people and setting them up, then it's a really powerful option for you to play Kingpin, right? And he's not horribly hard to get like a good amount of value out of. He scales pretty evenly, I would say. You can get a lot of value with him at high tiers because you can get really good at just predicting people's movements and, you know, tricking them or hiding yourself to get good advantages. But you also just get solid value out of exploiting people who just won't dodge your hooks when they're not like playing to predict them because they're just your average Joe Schmo, right? So where does this leave him? You're putting it into solid B tier. All right, Oath. I play an absolute butt ton of Oath, and the Oath nerfs from last patch that made it so he can no longer heal his shield and restore it after it's been broken with that heal, along with the heal itself getting nerfed, were pretty heavy nerfs to him. And then also making it so the stuns of hitting people into walls were pretty huge nerfs. But he is still a very strong character because he's just so useful for rocking reses with the Guardian Angel heal. He has good movement that you can like unlock if you start learning how to do it. I'm checking my stream for that. But the thing about him, you know, on top of having just like solid damage too, and just being a generally reliable character, is that the line for min-maxing his shield's value now is so tight. So tight to the point where it's like very inaccessible, I would say. There's a lot of characters in the game that have explosive damage. Myth's ultimate does. What other characters do? Strikes Bird Bomb. Kingpin's ult, I think, does, or maybe it has a bunch of damage. Jules R&B, the laser from Ghost, like half the things on Bishop's kit, her primary, her range nade. There's just so many things that will explode your shield, right, that you aren't ready to prepare for, and the fact that the shield's just low health anyway. And so if you don't have a really good understanding of like how much HP your shield actually has, and like when your cooldown's down, you'll find yourself like not only just having your shield break and becoming useless, but you'll find yourself like accidentally dashing in the wrong direction because you're trying to like empower your shield to block more damage, right? So while I think he's an A tier character, like objective power, I think he's definitely A tier. Potentially S tier just for the fact that he fills a role that's needed. Though kind of Myth's arrows just do that too because it's ridiculous in holding space and stuff like that. But there's a pretty huge change is what I would say basically. If you're brand new to Oath or you're not that good at the character, then it's gonna be really hard. If you're really good at him, then you get a lot of value. So we're gonna put him in like high C tier. That's about where I put him. I wish I could put my boy higher for the average guy, for you guys. But sorry, bro. Zeph, I think, is pretty accessible. I think you can get a lot of value out of his damage and his nade and his ultimate without being incredibly skilled with the character. But I think the character scales really high too when you're skilled with him. Zachary and my team does absolutely appalling things with this character. Literally Zenyatta 2.0, just dealing some insane amounts of damage while also just popping ridiculous heals too. And so in terms of like raw value, I think this character is like at least A. And I think I'll put him in lower B tier, I think, just because of how some of the things in his kit are a little bit less accessible. Like if you're using the, you know, how you can learn to like B hop with his charged up primary fire to like get extra distance and do those sorts of things, or making sure you're getting the marks on people and then exploding the marks and, you know, doing all that kind of stuff. But character's still very strong. All right, Aluna. So Aluna is easier to play, I think, than some of these other healers, just because, you know, you hit someone with the root, guaranteed value. You AoE heal that you can throw on someone, got it. You know, so you don't have to be choosing between that. You have very reliable, good movement that you can just pop around to save yourself if you were mispositioning. And the baseline, I pop ult on an ally that's down, or I just walk up and pick him up. It's pretty easy to understand, and as long as you get a decent feel for like what are the triggers for being able to save an ally and actually like certify you'll get the res off or pick them up physically, you can get a lot of value out of Aluna. And her damage is like not terrible either. So Aluna, I think, is pretty high tier B character. Naturally I put her more towards like C, but I think she's B, potentially low A, depending on how good you get the character. So yeah, guys, thanks for watching. Y'all are the best.